Hey everyone, this is Alex with another rapid-ish fire review, this time for Experiment 101's Biomutant. Now this is Experiment 101's first release. They're a small studio of about 20 to 25 people, so this was a rather large, if not monumental, undertaking for a group of that size. Though I do imagine having THQ Nordic as a publisher really helped with some of that burden. Biomutant is a third-person action RPG set in an open world. The land is plagued with pollution, monsters, and warring tribes. You play a small, fox-like little weasel creature thing who's returning to this land after being exiled, and it's up to you to decide the fate of the wars and ultimately the world. It has a variety of guns, melee weapons, biomutation abilities, psi-magic powers, and a whole bunch of mounts, puzzles, kind of, and a morality system. So there's an awful lot to go over here. First, we're going to tackle the writing stuff. So the world they built, the dialogue, and story progression of the game. The world itself is pretty interesting. Pollution killed off and or chased away the previous inhabitants, and have left the area a furry post-apocalypse. There are 6 warring tribes vying for supremacy, all with slightly different visions for the future. The tree of life at the center of the region is currently dying, and to make matters worse, giant monsters are speeding up the process by gnawing away at its roots. I actually like the setting and lore for this game. It's pretty damn charming. Now, it's been done a bunch before to be sure, but I think the setting is a good fit for this type of open-world RPG. The pollution and hazardous goop provide a good place to develop interesting mutations and powers, and it being set in the future lets them play with interesting interpretations of our current technology and weapons that the audience is familiar with, but from a futuristic animal society perspective. The dialogue for this game is a bit more hit or miss for me, though. There are NPCs all over with some things to say, some quests to give, but the more you play, the more you find them repeating dialogue or the interactions start to feel hollow. The main quest NPCs also have an absolutely absurd amount to say for many of the quest sections for no reason. You'll find you just need the platypus in a bathing suit to tell you where to go to get the doodad that makes the thingamabob work, and instead he gives you 10,000 words on your relationship with your mother, and how it impacts your feelings, and the world around you. I got tired of clicking through all of it towards the end of my first playthrough, and for my second playthrough I skipped almost all of it. It didn't feel impactful, it didn't feel important, and it's certainly a bad sign when I'm trying to speed through all of this. There's also a narrator, who's there to provide context and clues and a lot of little interjections as you play, and at the frequency that he popped up, I knew it would drive me absolutely nuts in a very short period of time. Fortunately, the developers did provide the ability to turn down the frequency of the narrator, so I did that very early on. Now, if you want to play Biomutant, I definitely recommend doing the same thing. I also want to bring up how awkwardly some of the cutscenes are presented. You'll finish a short quest, then the screen goes black. The angry, bad tribe guy fades in, says, "Gah, I'm mad at you," and he fades out. And then super quick, the good ally tribe guy fades in and says, "Yay, you did it," and then fades out. And then there's a new fade in, and then a new fade out. And it all takes about 5 seconds, and it feels awkward, and it definitely needs to be smoothed out. The main story progression starts off pretty slow. Actually, painfully slow. The developers chose to front-load the game with all of the tutorials for almost every aspect of the game at the very start, rather than sprinkling them throughout the game as they become relevant. So after character creation, we get the movement tutorials, the combat tutorials with melee ranged and combined, psi power tutorials, you go through looting and weapons crafting tutorials. There's a swimming tutorial, armor crafting tutorials, wild animal catching tutorials, and probably more than I'm forgetting. My issue with them is not in their existence, but in their execution. Spacing them out throughout the game allows for the game to build and maintain momentum so players get engrossed in the game you just spent years making. Forcing several of them all at once just as things are picking up absolutely murders any sort of momentum you have, and I'm positive you lost some players entirely at the start because of it. So once you get through the tutorials, the world opens up a bit and you can start taking on the main quests, and the story then moves along at an acceptable pace. You win the tribe war, you battle the big bads, you maybe help a villager, maybe strangle some squirrels along the way, save the world, standard stuff. Now we can get to the gameplay. Let's start with the combat. Now normally I could give you a brief summary of what I think about the combat for what was supposed to be a rapid-fire review, but this game had to go and make all of the aspects so wildly inconsistent in quality, fun, and usefulness that we have to break them down individually. First, let's talk guns. We have the fully automatic assault rifles, pistols, both single and dual-wielded, shotguns, rifles, and from there are custom builds with different stock, sights, receivers, ammo types, and all sorts of stuff to play with. I probably made every type of gun there is. One that shot dozens of saw blades in a matter of seconds, weapons that give the little forest creatures radiation poisoning and make them puke mid-fight, anything that you can think of. The customization options are vast, which is a huge plus, but the gameplay itself is pretty basic and left me wanting a bit more from the game. Because the gunplay is so simple, all that work you spent collecting and customizing feels less impactful. I was also pretty disappointed in the usefulness of some of the weapon types. They just were never good enough to use. For melee weapons, you have all sorts of knives, swords, bats, toilet brushes, clubs, axes, anything. You can use them in one or both hands, but no matter which choice you make, it never really feels satisfying. I actually stayed away from melee weapons pretty much from the start. Perhaps if you make an all-strength melee build, it will deal enough damage to feel good, but even after I made all the legendary weapons with the best possible components, I never liked melee. The magic or psi powers in the game is where I started, and never really left. The second I saw that I could use force lightning to electrocute mass groups of biker weasels, I was locked in. No guns, no melee, no anything ever came close to the damage per second I could put out with the magic abilities. I only used guns when I was out of key, and my key recharged so quickly I would only get a magazine worth of bullets or saw blades out before switching back to lightning or orbital bombardments. The extra utility Psi offers of being able to blink or flame dash around the map or in battle was great. Not to mention being able to fly over the battlefield while raining down lightning bolts and saw blades was a pretty good time. The biomutations were also pretty neat. Some were damage dealing and actually pretty powerful, some mind-controlled enemies, others provided useful special movement abilities. And then of course you could just barf toxic goo on the bad guys, which in turn makes them barf and take damage. Ultimately, combat ranged from boring and awful to fun and creative. I was honestly lucky that what I happened to choose for a playstyle was something I ended up enjoying. A lot of other people weren't so lucky. The open world was definitely filled with things to explore and look at, though I do really wish the enemy population was a bit higher than it was. There are large sections of the map that just feel empty. Even though you'll spend most of the time fast traveling from P-spot to P-spot, it's still nice to have a fully fleshed out world. Movement through the world presented another extreme case of mixed quality. Most of the time you get to freely move from place to place with little or no issues. The glider and mounts, once you get them, make moving around a bit faster too. But then again, the psi powers trivialize all of that since you can actually combine spells and then fly around the map. But when the movement is bad, it is really bad. Running near steep hills or mountainsides feels terrible. You'll get stuck, you'll slide all the way down for no reason, or you'll hit impassable terrain that does not in any way appear to be impassable. Without the ability to climb in the game, it's just best to avoid any sort of rough terrain. The worst of the movement issues, though, is water. I played through this game twice, on hard, and I probably drowned 10 times more than in all of the other ways combined. Movement through water is slow and awful. Jumping in water is out of the question as it eats a massive chunk of your keybar, and then you'll drown. And even spells like levitate don't make it any better, since you apparently cannot levitate over much of the water in this game. Though good luck figuring out what water can't be levitated over. Sometimes you'll make it over a big lake, sometimes you'll drown in a rain puddle. There are also puzzle things in this game, though I think it's generous, perhaps extremely so, to call them puzzles.
Brain over here. You good at these puzzles, man?
What, do you fail them all, Joe?
No, just once.
If you can figure out that the square pegs go in the square hole, and that the round pegs go in the round hole, then you have what it takes to master all of the puzzles of Biohazard. They start off easy, which led me to believe that these are just the tutorial puzzles, there to show you how they work and get used to them. But as you continue through the game, they just never get more difficult. Now I'm fine with keeping the main story puzzles easier to ensure that even kids playing this game can open the necessary doors and locks to finish the story. But there are secret Fallout bunkers, military bases, and weapons research facilities that are locked with what boils down to be, can you press this button? Cool, come on in. The Tribal War raid system starts off in the right place too. You pick an ally, then you raid 3 outposts and then the main fort of the rivals. But after the first time you've raided a tribe, you've pretty much seen all the variety that's offered. And since you will almost certainly raid at least 2 tribes, if not all of them like I did, it becomes very apparent that the depth of content doesn't quite match the scope. I was also expecting a bit more out of the world bosses in the game. Each world boss has a quest that has you build a vehicle and weaponry to reach their lair. Each quest, unfortunately, is exactly the same. You find the doodad, the thingamajig, and collect 5 whatsits, and then fight a big bad guy that 99% of the time will be miserably easy, and then 1% of the time will instantly kill you without warning. Some of my fights were also bugged, and the bosses just instantly died at the end of one of the phases, so I didn't even have to finish some of them. I honestly had more fun using my spells and weird abilities nuking the random NPCs than I did using a rocket-equipped mech to fight a 3-headed monster, and that definitely shouldn't be the case. The morality system in this game was present, but with like most morality systems in games, and honestly most aspects of this game, it was a bit more shallow than I expected. I was hoping for real choices where the light and dark aren't so cartoonishly opposed. Instead, I got choices like, do you want to strangle this tiny creature, or pet them? That's the kind of choices that you get. I don't need every choice in this game to be Sophie's choice. Just give me more realistic chances to make encounters easier for myself at the cost of maybe NPCs getting hurt. Maybe let me choose to loot the burning village or save the NPC stuck inside. Realistic choices that allow me to roleplay the way that I want to. For me, in my playthrough, the morality system just temporarily gated off some spells I could use, and very little else. Now, with all that said, even with all of its faults, I did have some fun with Biomutant. Certainly with my first playthrough. My second playthrough, I really didn't find much fun in the main quests or the bosses, but I really got to play with the spells and abilities, and could do even more cool things in and out of combat. This game seems like a love letter to so many games that I also absolutely love. Now, honestly, it never reaches the level of quality of its inspirations, but there's still some fun to be had if you want to sift through its shortcomings to find the cool things to do in combat, wander the world looking for interesting environments, or you just need something to fill the gap between the big AAA releases. Now, is this AA game worth its AAA $60 price tag? Well, you'd really have to love this style of game. It relies pretty heavily on charm and cool factor over story depth and crisp gameplay to get the $60 out of it. The more zen-like gamers who like to get lost and wander, who maybe don't mind simple and silly combat, could certainly find it worth that price. Though if you're the kind of gamer that wants tight mechanical combat and a compelling story above all else, I really don't think you'll like this game, even if it is discounted. For those with Xbox Game Pass, right now it is included on Xbox One and Series X, so that's a great option if you have that available to you. For me, this is an incredibly charming but average-ish game that starts really slow, relies on you wanting to do cool or ridiculous shit to have fun, and forces you to go digging for it. I was charmed by it. I did have some fun with it, and I do believe it's above average for a AA game. But that AAA price tag, the AAA trailers and advertisements that led me to believe I was getting a lot more than I did, does a lot to harm the leeway I would give a AA studio on release. So I'm giving Biomutant an average 5 out of 10 score, with the footnote that I did have fun with this game despite its faults, and I do think that some of you will also enjoy this game. I just recognize that not everyone is going to have the same experience. With this kind of content coming from such a small studio on their first game, I can't wait to see what they come out with their second. If they can address the content versus scope disparity, tighten up some of the core functions of the game, I think that their next offering will be something special. Now, I really appreciate you sticking with me through this not-so-rapid-fire review. Let me know what you think of the game in the comments. Thanks so much, and we shall see you next time on The Angry Joe Show.